Hi, Jennifer Stuart here. I am so excited to have with me today Josh Straub as part of my Peace and Joy Parenting series. And I wanted to introduce Josh to you guys a little bit. He is a husband to his wife, Christi, and he has two children, Landon and Kennedy. He serves as a marriage and family strategist for LifeWay Christian Resources and leads Famous at Home, a company equipping leaders, organizations, military families, and churches in emotional intelligence and family wellness. He is a family advocate and professor of child psychology crisis response. He coaches families and leaders to be famous at home so they can thrive on their stage. He's also written and co-authored 4 books, including Safe House, How Emotional Safety is the Key to Raising Kids Who Live, Love, and Lead Well. And he is the creator, along with Christi, of 22/6 Parenting, an online community of parents offering discipleship tools for their kids. So how are you doing today, Josh? Glad to have you.
I'm doing well, thank you. Speaking of kids, we just dropped our daughter off today for her first day of preschool. So we are in those years. So yeah, it's good.
So did she just walk right in, or were there some?
Well, this was her. So this would be her 3rd year there for preschool. So she's just a champ. Yeah, she goes in and so it's great. Yeah, she's
all right. And you didn't cry either. Sometimes the parents cry more than the kids. So
Mama cries more than Dad does. Yeah.
Okay. I know. Sometimes I feel like the kids are happy and the moms need a hug. So.
Yeah, exactly. Although it did sound, there's a lot of kids in there for their first day, and it did sound like a lot of crying, a lot of separation anxiety going on. It's a great test case if you're doing a study on parenting and toddlers and toddlers in those early years. It was crazy. So
yeah, no, I know firsthand working with that with my preschool. So definitely.
Yeah. Fortunately, our daughter wasn't one of those today, so that was
very good. Yay.
Yeah.
All right. So I wanted to chat with you. One of the things I was most interested in that you cover is the whole, emotional intelligence and helping kids develop healthfully in that area. And so what are some of the first steps parents can do to tune into their kids' emotions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of that really comes down to being a student of our kids. The Bible says in Proverbs 22:6, it says to raise a child in the way they should go, not the way we want them to go. And I think too often what we end up doing as parents is we have these agendas, as parents. We want our kids to be a certain way. Or another example would be, our son. I'm going to use an example of our son. He loves playing the guitar and he loves singing and he loves making up music. And I had a friend come in from California. He did flew a red eye, and he landed here, and he comes into our house at like 7:30 in the morning, and he's so tired. And our son just wakes up, and he's about 3 at the time. This is about 3 years ago. And he comes down and he's playing his guitar and he's singing, he's making up these loud songs. And I'm like, listen, Mr. Frank wants to go to, he wants to rest. Like, he doesn't need to be listening to, he's just one song. And I was apologizing to my friend, and he's like, no, he's like, Josh, this is incredible. And our son's like, hey, Mr. Frank, you want to hear another song? And I'm like, no, kiddo, no, this is annoying. And my friend's like, no, Josh, I really want to hear your other song. Just get me some coffee, and then we'll get rolling. And a lot of times what we see as annoying behavior in our children are actually what they're passionate about. It's actually what they love doing. And yet so often we kind of push it aside and we just say, don't be doing that, or, eat all your food. Like we have these agendas as parents that we want our kids to, act a certain way or be a certain way, which are important. But sometimes we get so caught up in them that we don't listen to our kids or really become a student of their passions, their interests, and who God's created them to be, who they are. But even more importantly than that is what they're experiencing underneath. So a lot of times, especially in those early years, the toddler years, the temper tantrum years, our kids aren't born into the world understanding emotion. They have no idea how to label it. They have no idea what it is. This is the first time they're ever experiencing it. And so as parents, to expect our kids to just immediately understand what anger is or what frustration is and have self-regulation, we don't even self-regulate very well as parents. I mean, think of how often we get into tiffs with our spouse, like it's so important that we look at that in our kids, that we see it in our kids and then help them learn how to navigate it well. So it's just seeing, it's becoming students.
Yeah, no, definitely. I like that. You touched on a few things definitely there that I find interesting, because I think as parents, oftentimes when we have kids, we have this whole dream and plan in our heads for them, right? So whether they're going to be a ballerina or a football player, or they're going to play the violin, or so we try to put those, onto our children, with the best of intentions, right? We have this dream for them, but then and that goes along with emotions. Maybe we deal with things in one way, and then our child deals with challenges in a totally different way. And we're like, I don't understand you. I don't get you. Like, this is not the way I feel when that happens. So,
yeah, no. And I think what's really important in those moments is, especially like, for instance, a great example of this would be our son, a little while back, was upstairs we have an upstairs playroom, and he's near the window. It was springtime here in Nashville, and it was like the 2 weeks out of the year where it's not humid enough you can actually keep the windows open. And so the screen's open, and there's this little sticker on the bottom of the screen, and he says, "Daddy, what's that say?" And I didn't even think anything of it. I just read it out loud, and it said, "Caution, screen will not prevent child from falling out window." And our son just slowly starts to back away from the window, and he went and played, and he didn't say anything else. At about 2:30 in the morning, I get this tap on my shoulder, and he's in tears, and he's saying, "Daddy," through his, he's trying to catch his breath, I might fall out the window. And so a long story short is I took him over and I laid down with him, and our daughter heard him. So I ended up going and laying with her, and my wife came over, and she laid with him for the next 30 minutes and just talked with him and asked him questions. And I think that's important in the early years, in these early preschool years, if we can just ask our kids questions, because they're feeling the emotion. He was at 2:30 in the morning. I don't know if he had a dream about it. I don't know if he woke up and he just continued to be thinking about falling out the window, but it had affected him emotionally. And he needs to process that. So putting language to that is really important. He's already feeling it. So it's not that we have to say, "Hey, what are you feeling?" It's just, what are you scared of? What are you thinking? And getting him. So she laid with him for the next 30 minutes and at 2:30 in the morning, and just listened as he asked questions about the window and the screen and what would happen and what this, and if it would happen and all those types of things. But kids have these things going on in their brains. And in order to connect what they're experiencing, it's important to get them to talk. It's important to ask questions. And so that's why we talk about, becoming students of our kids. No question is a dumb question when it comes to our kids, because it's getting them to label and put language to what they're experiencing. And if we can get them to do that from a very early age in those preschool years, it sets them up for success all the way into the teenage years and into adulthood.
Yeah, no, I love that. So how do we get little kids who are still developing language in general to figure out how in the world to put words to what they're feeling and what they're dealing with? Because that's tricky.
No, it is very tricky. It's a great question. And we use a feelings chart. So a feelings chart would be a great way to do that. In fact, we have a children's book that we're working on that'll release next year called "What Am I Feeling?" And it is a great way for parents to interact with their kids on what they're experiencing, what they're feeling. So a feelings chart with the face and we have one that we developed on our website that you can check out. And so it's a very great way we hang it on our refrigerator. And so when our kids are acting out or they don't know what they're experiencing, we go over and ask them to point to the emotion, and then we talk to them about what that emotion is, and just the importance that the emotions don't drive their behavior. See, early on in the preschool years, kids act out of their emotion. And so what we're teaching them is to say, "Listen, this is what we're feeling. Now, what's the right decision to make? Even though this is what we're feeling, what's the right decision to choose based upon the situation and what we're feeling?" And so, it's a great way to interact. We also personally, just being very practical, we love Daniel Tiger, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I mean, truly singing those songs are really, really important for kids. There was one morning we came downstairs and our daughter was sad, and our son was sitting in the living room, and we heard him singing, when you're feeling sad, talk about it and you'll feel better. It's a Daniel Tiger song, and he's comforting our daughter, his little sister, with a Daniel Tiger song about feeling sad. So even those jingles, they're really critical. We love Daniel Tiger. I think those moments for kids and those jingles just stick with them. So they're important.
Yeah, no, I love it. Daniel Tiger is great, and kids do learn so much through songs. I mean, we teach academic stuff in our preschool all the time through songs. So I love that.
Yeah. Songs, repetition is huge. And the other important piece of that too is, one of the things that we do is we use Bible verses for right and wrong. So we use, for instance, we would use golden rule would be a great example. Treat others as you want to be treated. And so when they're acting out or they're overwhelmed, do not sin in your anger. Don't, have bad behavior when you're angry. Those types of things, our kids are learning those so that they can understand what is the right decision, even when we're overwhelmed. So if I'm going to pick on my sister, I'm going to, we get into sibling rivalry stuff. I'm going to take a toy, which then she gets angry, or he's jealous because she has a toy. No, we're going to treat others as you want to be treated, and use the golden rule. And so, even using those types of things to help them navigate emotion is really important, because what you're doing is you're teaching them right from wrong, even in the middle of what they're feeling.
Yeah, no, and I really like if you're labeling the emotion with words, then it's helping the kid, I think, see that they are not the emotion. That's not who they are. That is a thing that they're going through and they're experiencing. But yeah, that doesn't make them a bad person because they feel irritated or angry or whatever the emotion is. Yeah, I really like.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Keeping it separate from them. And I love, going back to the story of when your wife sat there or laid down with him, was talking about the window. I mean, as most parents, right, at 2:30 in the morning, that's the last thing you want to do. You're like, I just want to go back to bed. Let's just deal with it in the morning. You're being silly, right? As an adult, you're like, you're not going to fall out the window. Understanding.
Well, and it's very true. And that's why I use that example, because I took him back to bed. I was ready to go back to sleep. I just went over, I laid with him and was trying to rub his back to go back to sleep. And then our daughter started crying. And so I went over to her and he flipped out. Like, he didn't want me to leave him. So then that's when my wife heard him and she said, what's going on? And, to her credit, she stayed with him for the next 30 minutes in that moment. And I think those golden moments are huge as parents. We need to capitalize on those golden opportunities to really get into their world, because from a brain perspective, our brains grow. So what I'm explaining right now is really neuroscience. I write in Safe House that parenting isn't rocket science, it's just brain surgery. And like, when you build relationships with your kids early on in life, especially those first 5 years of life, that is the part of the season. Those first 5 years are when the brain grows the most rapidly. And so to wire our kids' brains in such a way that they understand emotion, that they understand what they're feeling, and they understand right from wrong, when we wire a kid's brain for relationships, they become wired for relationships. When we wire them for screens, they become wired for screens. Now, I throw in the screen piece there because screens in those first 5 years of life are really, really like, the importance of limiting in those early years is really, really crucial. And the reason is because the brain grows, I talked about already, from the right to the left. So the right side of the brain is that experiential here and now. It's that emotional overwhelmingness, if you will. It's when our kids are in the grocery store, they're throwing the temper tantrums. They are in the right side of the brain, right? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to put language, the left side of the brain, to what they're experiencing. So that middle part of the brain, where the brain meets, or that middle part of the brain, is called the corpus callosum. It's kind of like I describe as the binding of the book, if you will. When you have a book and you have just the right side of the book, if you don't have the left side of the book, you don't have a full story.
Sure.
It's the same thing as in our brains. When we have this emotional experience, if we haven't put language to it, it creates what's called disintegration in the brain. And so to help our kids put language to what they're experiencing, is huge for having them have a coherent story, a coherent narrative. Now, what do I mean by that? You can tell a person's the quality of their relationship by their ability to do narrative recall, to retell their story. So for instance, one of the things we talk a lot about is, in order to be emotionally safe with your kids, you have to have a great story yourself as a parent. You have to be emotionally safe. You have to have been able to reconcile and not get overly frustrated when your kids are overly frustrated, right? If you're yelling and screaming in the middle of the temper tantrum, it's just going to ratchet up the temper tantrum, and it's going to ratchet up the parent, and nobody's calming down. And so to be that calming voice, that calm person in the midst of the temper tantrum, it brings the child back down. But our ability to do that is linked to our ability to do narrative recall. It's our ability to put language to our own story. And so if we grew up in a home, a great example would be this. If I were to ask you and say, hey, what's your relationship like with your mom? Oh, I had a great mom. She was there for me. She was good. Okay, so how was she there for you? Oh, she's just a good mom. The inability to go talk about detail as it relates to our relationships shows the quality of that relationship. Versus if you were to say, what's your relationship like with your mom? Oh man, my mom was amazing. I was picked on at school one time, and I can remember my mom coming and picking me up after being bullied at school, and she took me out for ice cream, and we talked about it afterwards. And then later on, she asked me if I wanted to have my best friend over, and I had my best friend over, and it was just a great time of encouragement. My mom always made sure that she picked me up when I was down. The difference in narrative recall is so critical to a child's ability to tell a great story, to live a great story. And so when we can put language by asking simple questions, how was your day? What did you experience? What was your favorite parts? What are you most afraid of? Then what? Even then what is a great question, because it takes the story even further.
Right.
That's binding the book. It's a really powerful way to help kids put language to what they're experiencing and feeling.
Yeah, no, I love that. The open-ended questions, right? Because often it's like, how was school? Fine. Did you have a good day? Yes. Those short answers.
Exactly.
I like that. Then
open-ended questions. Yeah. Then what? And who did you play with? And what did you play? And what was the most exciting part? What didn't you like about today? What wasn't a good part of your day? Those types of questions are really important.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you touched on a lot of things that were very interesting. So, because helping kids learn how to read and things like that, we want to help them, work on cross-body movements with painting on easels. And so that's connecting the sides of the brain. So, but I never really thought about, obviously working with putting the language to the emotions is the same thing, developing the two parts of the brain working together. So
well, and you do that in the preschool. You do that through drawing, through painting, through all those types of things, especially and in therapy, it's play therapy. You're asking kids to draw their family. Draw your family, draw what vacation looks like for your family, draw what, playtime looks like, draw what, and draw what it looks like, draw your grandparents, and you paint these pictures and you draw these pictures. Kids are literally playing out their emotions through play and through that, through the drawing and the painting. And also play is also an important part because kids don't have a lot of power. So independent play is really important in those preschool years because what you're doing, a great example of this is when you see your children, if you go to the doctor and you come home, you take your child to the doctor because they're ill. When they start feeling better, the first thing they start playing is doctor. And who's the doctor? They're the doctor. Right. Why? Because it gives them a sense of power. They don't have a lot of power in other areas of their life. So when you become the patient and you allow them to become the doctor, they're playing out that power and, in their life. Those are so critical. Those are such critical moments. And that also is part of binding that story together through play and through learning.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's one of the things I've seen become more of a struggle. And I'm sure largely because of the electronics, or at least that's what I believe, is that I have a lot of kids come to my school who what should be like the most fun part of the day, like totally open-ended free play. There's kids looking at us like, all right, you have to give me an assignment or tell me what to do because they've kind of lost that. And then obviously then that's going to hurt their emotional development.
Well, and to your point on that, research shows there was a meta-analysis done that looked at the top 10 parenting strategies to get the outcomes we're looking for in our kids. And so a meta-analysis is basically where you take a lot of other studies and you analyze all those studies to kind of get the top 10. And the fourth most effective parenting strategy in that study was raising kids to be independent. And I think you're right. We have put, when our kids, we have allowed our kids to not be bored. Right. When we're trying to have a moment as a parent, like we're trying to clean up the kitchen, we're trying to just have a moment to ourselves. I mean, let's just talk about having a moment to ourselves. And our kids are running around, especially in those preschool years, they're running, mommy, daddy. What's the first thing we do? We'll go watch a movie or put on a screen. Here's an iPad. And what we're doing is we're inhibiting them from learning to play on their own, to find who they are, to discover what they love. And that is hindering a lot of today's generation. And I hear from, just like yourself, from preschool teachers, kindergarten teachers, that kids are coming into this kindergarten these days not knowing how to even hold a crayon. You know, they can move their thumb, but the gross and fine motor skills are lacking compared to when they taught 10, 20 years ago. They have seen the fine and gross motor skills decline through these last number of years. So.
Yeah, well, yeah, and the biggest thing for me that really upsets me is that they don't want to play. Like, there's all these, there's paint, there's Play-Doh, there's dress up, there's blocks, there's trains, there's the kitchen, and they look at you like, and they'll try to go over to where we have a little iPod that plays music, and they will try to go over there and look on the screen of the picture of the CD, and like, so we'll turn it over or hide it, like, there's no movie on there, go play.
Well, and if I can too, this is where Mr. Rogers, this is why we champion Mr. Rogers so much. There was a research study done that looked at children's television programming. Forget iPads, forget any of that. Just look at children's television programming. You want me to just pick that back up?
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. We had a little internet connection there. So anyway, yeah, go ahead. If you can talk some more about the Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, I'll pick that back up. So the study looked at the number of screen changes in children's television programming. And it was, what they found was that even in Baby Einstein, there was one episode, A Day on the Farm, where there were 7 screen changes in 20 seconds. And so what happened was it created inattention in children where they couldn't pay attention. So what ends up happening when they do go on a farm, they're bored. The only children's television program from Sesame Street, and Sesame Street's where the screen changes started happening. And we look at Sesame Street today and we're like, wow, it's it feels slow, but that's where it started to happen. And since then, the screen changes have rapidly increased. The only television program to not create inattention in children was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And it was because Mr. Rogers talked to the children face to face on the screen without it rapidly moving. And I think that's what you're seeing today with the kids not playing. There's this inattention. They need a screen in order to, they need the dopamine. They need the dopamine kick. It's literally like an addiction where they need that because otherwise they're bored.
Yeah, or it has to be super exciting. Yeah, in general, I mean, we've had to change the kinds of books that we read. I used to like to read more of the sweet stories with the watercolor pictures, and now we have to read the ones that have lots of jokes and there's only a sentence on the page, so you can turn it. Otherwise, you've lost the whole class. Yeah. So
Wow. Yeah. So any parents watching, listening, I would just highly, highly, highly recommend, if you want your children to be leaders in the future, limit the screens now.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I want to go back to, so you're talking about parents trying to keep their emotions calm in the midst of, a child's tantrum storm, right? And that's hard because we're human too. We have emotions too. Yep. And I especially, I think it's hard too for parents when, maybe they grew up with a mom or a dad who was like that. And so how do you then figure out as a parent, all right, I know I didn't like that. I know they did their best, but I want to do it differently. So how do you figure out as a parent how to stay calm when you didn't have that as an example?
Yeah, I think awareness is yellers, and they yelled a lot. and now you're finding yourself yelling a lot. It's catching yourself. It's immediately saying, whoa, I'm doing this. And I think right now, if you're watching, where you as a parent are kind of, if you're an emotionally aware parent at any level, where the areas you want to change. The things that you do that you go, I need to check that. As you become aware, that's the key, becoming aware of it. If you're not aware of it, ask your spouse. That's going to be very difficult because we tend to get tricky. Defensive. Yeah, but I think if we genuinely want to be good parents, being able to have a non-defensive, non-shaming conversation with our spouse to say, man, we really need to become better parents. How can we become better parents? What can this look like for us? And I mean, there are times Christi and I, talk to one another and just say, hey, have you noticed this lately? Have you noticed this lately in terms of how we're doing this, And a lot of times I'll put the onus on me as well and say, hey, I've not been keeping up. I haven't been as strong. So a great example of this would be that our son has lately been asking for forgiveness rather than permission. So, he likes to go get a snack, and he'll go get a snack, and then he'll, oh, I'm sorry, you didn't ask. Well, I'm sorry. And I know I've become lax in that, and Christi has too. And so we had to start going, okay, no, we're going to make sure we start cracking down, because it's easy to start, getting lax in certain areas, but having those conversations is really important. I would also say, and the reason your spouse is because they're the ones who see you intimately interacting with the kids. Another great way to do this, and this is humbling, is asking your kids, saying, hey, what could I do to be a better parent? Or what could I do to, what would you love for me to do? A great question is, what would you love for me to do with you more often? That's a great question. I ask that question a lot of my kids. What would you like to do with me? What would you like me to do with you more often? Because the reality is, especially in those preschool years, our kids just want our time. They don't care what we do. They don't care who we are. They don't care what titles we have. Nobody cares. My kids don't even know what a Ph.D. is. They don't care if I have a Ph.D. They just want their dad's time. That's all they want. And so I think, asking those types of questions of, what would you like to do with me, or what can I do with you more often? What would you like to do this weekend as a family? What do you think that where do you think we could be doing more as a family? Just even thinking through some of those questions and inviting the kids into some of those conversations is important. Ultimately, having a group of friends, at the one extreme, counseling might be very important. I went to 2 years of counseling before I was married in my early 20s, worked through a lot of my parents' divorce, worked through a lot of family patterns, a lot of things that I saw that I was picking up as a man from my own family of origin. I think counseling is a very important part of that process for a lot of people. Also journaling on a daily basis or on a regular basis, and then also a group of friends. In your case, a group of other moms that you can just process with, and you can just say, I've been finding that I've been doing this a lot lately. Does anybody else struggle with this? Those are important pieces to take a look at. I think one of the biggest things to think about is we either parent the way our parents parented us, or we do the opposite without even thinking about it, because we hate the way our parents parented us. And so we go to the opposite extreme. I would just really encourage to be careful to not go to extremes. Stay in the middle. We bounce. Our society goes from one extreme to another. And, there was in decades past, there was an emphasis on discipline. We have to discipline our kids. We have to discipline our kids. We have to make sure they understand right from wrong. They have to discipline them. Yet on the other side, there's been this swing that has gone from this, because we didn't like it, to this, let's allow our kids to have lollipops and anything that they want, and they're the best, and we're going to just champion who they are, and we're going to make sure that they never leave our home. And, we coddle them to the point that they're still in our house at 26 years of age, and they have no idea who they are. And we give them trophies for everything, because heaven forbid if we hurt their feelings. And it's like, no, like No, there is a middle ground. You can actually parent well by loving your kids. And by the way, loving your kids really well means you actually discipline them. Like, let's find that middle ground together and let's walk that middle ground so that we're not bouncing from extreme to extreme.
Yeah, although I think when you say discipline, you don't mean like coming down and being super hard on them. I would imagine you're meaning understanding their emotions and then helping guide them through making good choices, right?
Yeah, one of the things that I use in Safe House when I wrote the book is that there's 4 walls of parenting. There's exploration and protection. We want to allow our kids to explore the world around them, but we can't let them explore too far, age inappropriately, right? I mean, if you're 3-year-olds running out onto the street and doesn't understand what cars are, there has to be a level of protection. So that exploration and protection. The other 2 walls that I describe are grace and truth, and grace is that relational leading in grace. I'm going to understand your world. I want to understand what's happening in your heart and in your mind. And truth is following up with limits, and it's following up with the truth. But truth without grace will always be received as condemnation. If I were a parent and I were coming on here right now and I was saying, listen, parents, if you're giving your kids iPads, you're the worst parent in the world. You need to stop it. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, get rid of them. And I didn't have any grace that sometimes we need, as parents to have a break, and maybe a 30 minutes on a Daniel Tiger episode is great for our sanity. If I didn't lead with that, parents wouldn't even watch this. They would not want me to listen to me because they would discredit me because all I was about was just the hard rules and the truth. It's condemnation. And our kids experience that. If all we're about is just follow the rules, follow the rules, follow the rules, and there's not this grace of understanding why they need to follow the rules, it's going to build a huge wall between our hearts and theirs.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Josh. I think we're about at our 30-minute time here, and I'm trying to keep these short enough for busy parents to be able to watch the whole thing. So anyway, but I do want to ask, if people want to come and learn more from you or about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, you can check out drjoshandchristi.com or joshuastraub.com. It goes to the same place. We have a weekly podcast called In This Together, the In This Together podcast. We're all in this together. It's got a crooked picture frame around the in this part together because we all have brokenness in our families, and we're all just trying to messily apply this stuff in our homes. And so you can check that out, inthistogetherpodcast.com. And then I also you can check out famousathome.com as well.
Great. And your book, if somebody wants to read your Safe House book, what's the best way for them to get that as well?
Yeah, either LifeWay.com or Amazon.com. Any retailer would have Safe House. So, yeah.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and I hope people will go and learn more. I think what you're offering out there about helping parents understand their kids' emotions is wonderful. I think that's really needed. So thank you for doing that. Thank you so much.
And thank you for having me. It was an honor being with you.
All right, thank you.